She manipulated a dying man. My father, Paul, wept into his handkerchief, his voice echoing off the high ceilings of the Newport Superior Court. She kept us away. She poisoned his mind while his body was failing. We are asking the court to invoke the Slayer rule. She doesn't just deserve to be disinherited, Your Honor. She belongs in prison. Beside him, my mother, Elizabeth, trembled, clutching a rosary she hadn't touched in 20 years. To the gallery, they looked like grieving children mourning their beloved patriarch. To me, they looked like cornered animals. I stood alone at the defense table, my hands resting on the cool surface of the mahogany. I didn't look at them. I looked at the judge, Evelyn Vance, a legend in Rhode Island law, known for her iron spine and a memory that spanned decades. She was reading the criminal complaint my parents had filed: elder abuse, fraud, embezzlement, accusations designed to freeze my grandfather's $1.92 billion estate and put me behind bars. Slowly, Judge Vance lowered the file. She took off her glasses. Her eyes, sharp as cut glass, moved from the weeping performance at the plaintiff's table to me. She didn't speak, she just stared. And then, for the first time in her 40-year career, Judge Vance froze. Her hand hovered over the gavel, trembling slightly. The recognition in her eyes wasn't just professional, it was personal. It was the look of someone seeing a ghost. "Wait," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the courtroom's heating system. "The charges are against you? Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community." My mother's sobs were perfectly pitched for the acoustics of the courtroom, a performance honed over decades of charity galas and strategic victimhood. She expected me to crack. She expected the daughter she discarded 25 years ago to dissolve into tears and beg for mercy. But she had forgotten who raised me. I denied them the dignity of eye contact. I refused to let them see me flinch. I simply reached into my briefcase and pulled out a matte black tablet. I placed it on the defense table with a soft, deliberate click. To them, it was just a piece of technology. To me, it was the Black Ledger, an encrypted, cloud-backed archive of every wire transfer, every offshore shell company, and every lie told in the Sterling name for the last decade. They thought this was a family dispute. I knew it was an audit, and the audit was finished. You see, I wasn't raised in a home. I was raised in a 50-room monument to the Gilded Age, perched on the cliffs of Newport where the fog eats the sunlight by noon. The Sterling estate was a place of echoing hallways and furniture draped in white sheets. To my parents, the estate wasn't a home. It was a liquidation center they hadn't figured out how to sell yet. They were loud, chaotic storms that blew in for summer parties to drink the wine cellar dry and vanished when the bills came due. I learned early that silence wasn't empty. It was safe. Silence didn't lie to you. Silence didn't promise to come back for your birthday and then forget. While other children learned nursery rhymes, I learned to read ledgers in my grandfather's study. The library became my nursery, the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock my only lullaby. I became invisible, a ghost in my own inheritance. But the thing about ghosts is that they see everything. I watched my grandfather, Arthur Sterling, build a fintech empire from that study. I watched him age, and I watched my parents circle him like vultures, waiting for the moment his hand shook too much to sign a check. They accused me of elder abuse. They claimed I isolated him to steal his fortune. The truth was far more clinical. I didn't isolate him. I immunized him. For the last 5 years, I wasn't just his granddaughter. I was his ghost CEO. While Paul and Elizabeth were burning cash in Monaco and leveraging their future on bad debts, I was the one balancing the books in the dark. I was the one quietly paying off their gambling markers to keep the Sterling name clean. They thought I was the maid. In reality, I was the landlord. And today, rent was due. My lawyer, a man whose hourly rate could purchase a small island, stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a grand opening statement. He simply plugged an HDMI cable into the tablet I had placed on the table. The courtroom monitors flickered to life. It wasn't a will. It wasn't a sentimental letter. It was a forensic audit of the Sterling Empire for the last 60 months. The data was raw, brutal, and undeniable. You see, my parents didn't just neglect my grandfather. They cannibalized him. 5 years ago, Arthur suffered his first stroke. To Paul and Elizabeth, that wasn't a medical emergency. It was a dinner bell. They viewed his incapacity as an opportunity to raid the corporate accounts. They spent a summer in Monaco that cost $400,000, billed to the company as business development. They liquidated stock options to cover margin calls on bad real estate bets in Dubai. They treated the Sterling legacy like a personal ATM with no withdrawal limit. I saw the red ink before anyone else. Panic is for people who don't understand the variables. I simply went to work. I moved into the guest house on the estate, not as a granddaughter, but as a crisis manager. I fired their sycophants. I restructured the debt. When they were sleeping off hangovers in Saint-Tropez, I was negotiating with creditors in Tokyo at 3 in the morning. I wasn't just keeping the lights on, I was rewiring the entire building. They accused me of undue influence. They claimed I poisoned Arthur's mind against them. The truth was far more damaging. I didn't have to poison his mind. I just showed him the math. I showed him the spreadsheets. I showed him that his son and daughter-in-law were not just disappointing children. They were liabilities. Bad investments. And Arthur Sterling never held on to a bad investment. On the screen, a flowchart appeared, mapping the trajectory of the family fortune. Thick red lines tracked wire transfers from the main estate into shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands under my father's name. The dates corresponded perfectly with the times they claimed to be blocked from visiting. Projected bankruptcy, 2022, the chart read in stark black letters. Next to it, a steep green line rose like a cliff face. Actual growth, 18%. That green line was me. That was my life force converted into profit margins. That was 5 years of silence, 5 years of cleaning up their messes, 5 years of being the adult while they played dress-up. I looked at the judge, my expression unchanging. I wasn't stealing their inheritance. I was reclaiming the value I had created. Every single dollar in that estate existed because I stood between their greed and the company's solvency. They called me a predator. But looking at the data glowing on the screens, it was mathematically clear who the parasites were. I wasn't claiming a windfall. I was collecting my salary, and the arrears were substantial. If the courtroom was a theater, my mother was gunning for a standing ovation. She took the stand with the fragile grace of a tragic heroine, clutching a lace handkerchief that she dabbed against dry eyes. Under oath, she didn't just lie, she rewrote reality. "We tried to visit," she sobbed, her voice trembling with practiced heartbreak. "We drove to Newport every Christmas, every birthday." Kelsey locked the gates. She told the staff to turn us away. We sent her envelopes of cash for tuition because we knew Arthur was tight with money. She took it all and cut us out. She held our father hostage. The gallery murmured in sympathy. They saw a grieving mother rejected by a cold, ungrateful child. But I didn't see a liar. I watched her with the detachment of a clinician observing a pathogen under a microscope. You see, most people assume that villains know they are the bad guys. They assume my parents were consciously spinning a web of deceit. But looking at Elizabeth Sterling's tear-streaked face, I realized the truth was far more disturbing. This wasn't just perjury, it was a psychological survival mechanism. It's called cognitive dissonance. To a narcissist, the self is perfect. Therefore, any evidence that contradicts that perfection must be false. My parents couldn't accept that they had abandoned their child and robbed their father. That reality would shatter their fragile egos. So, their minds invented a new narrative. In their version of the story, they weren't predators. They were victims. They weren't thieves. They were martyrs. They genuinely believed that my grandfather's money belonged to them by divine right, and therefore, my stewardship of it was the actual theft. To them, my boundaries were an act of aggression. I wasn't a person they had hurt. I was an asset that had malfunctioned. My father took the stand next. He didn't weep. He raged. He painted a picture of a senile old man manipulated by a granddaughter who was cold as ice. He claimed I had forged the financial reports. He claimed the black ledger was a fabrication designed to frame them. "I loved my father," Paul declared, slamming his hand against the railing. "And she wouldn't let me say goodbye." I offered no objections. In the world of forensic accounting, you never interrupt a target when they are busy incriminating themselves. I let them build their castle of glass. I let them stack every lie, every delusion, every tear-soaked accusation one on top of the other until it towered over the courtroom. They thought my silence was submission. They didn't realize they were putting their version of the truth on the record. And the thing about records is that they can be cross-referenced. They were claiming they were present, loving, and blocked by my malice. They had just sworn to it under penalty of perjury. And that was exactly where I needed them. My lawyer didn't bother with a cross-examination. He didn't ask my father to clarify his timeline or ask my mother to wipe her tears. He simply tapped the screen of the tablet one more time. A soft chime echoed through the courtroom, signaling a new evidence display. The large monitors mounted on the walls flickered. The complex financial flowcharts vanished, replaced by a high-resolution scan of a yellowed, typewriter font document. It looked ancient compared to the digital precision of the ledger, but the seal at the top was unmistakable. It was a court order from the family division, dated 25 years ago. The room went deadly silent. I watched my parents. For a moment, they squinted at the screen, confused. Then, recognition hit them like a physical blow. My mother stopped crying instantly. My father's face drained of all color, leaving him looking gray and hollow. They recognized the font. They recognized the date. And most importantly, they recognized their own signatures at the bottom of the page. The document title was bold and underlined: Voluntary Relinquishment of Parental Rights and Settlement Agreement. You see, they hadn't just left me at the gate. They hadn't just been blocked by a cruel grandfather. The truth was far more transactional. 25 years ago, after a summer of neglect that nearly ended with me drowning in the pool while they were hosting a cocktail party, the state had intervened. My grandfather didn't just take custody, he bought it. He offered them a choice. They could face charges for criminal negligence, or they could sign away their rights, take a lump sum payment, and disappear. They chose the money. "Your Honor," my lawyer said, his voice cutting through the silence. "The plaintiffs have testified under oath that they were loving parents kept away against their will. This document, notarized and filed with the state, proves otherwise. It shows that on November 4th, 1998, Paul and Elizabeth Sterling accepted a wire transfer of $2 million in exchange for terminating their parental rights and agreeing to a permanent restraining order against themselves." The gasp from the gallery was audible. The narrative of the grieving, excluded parents evaporated in seconds, replaced by the image of two people who had literally sold their child for a settlement check. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a liquidation event. I was a bad asset they had offloaded for cash. But the twist wasn't done. Judge Vance stood up. She wasn't looking at the lawyers. She was staring at the bottom of the document on her own monitor, her eyes wide behind her glasses. She leaned over the bench, her voice trembling with a suppressed fury that terrified everyone in the room. "I know this document," she said. She looked at my parents, and for the first time, she looked dangerous. "I didn't just read it in the evidence binder. I drafted it." My parents froze. They hadn't recognized her. 25 years ago, Evelyn Vance hadn't been a judge. She had been the ambitious young district attorney who prosecuted their negligence case. She was the one who had looked them in the eye across a settlement table and watched them sign away their toddler for the price of a yacht. "I witnessed these signatures," Judge Vance said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "I watched you take that check. I watched you smile as you walked out of my office, leaving a 3-year-old girl behind without a backward glance. And you have the audacity to come into my courtroom, 25 years later, and lie to my face about your devotion?" The civil suit was effectively over. But something much worse had just begun. Judge Vance pressed a button on her console. "Bailiff," she said, her tone icy, "lock the doors. We are no longer discussing a will contest. We are discussing perjury. We are discussing fraud upon the court. And I suggest the plaintiffs do not try to leave. Panic is a quiet thing before it becomes loud." In the locked courtroom, the silence broke. My parents' lawyer, a man who specialized in aggressive estate litigation, suddenly looked like he wanted to be invisible. "Your Honor," he stammered, gathering his papers with trembling hands. "I must inform the court that I was unaware of the existence of this prior agreement. Given these revelations, I am moving to withdraw as counsel immediately." "Denied," Judge Vance said without looking at him. "You filed the motion. You will sit there until I dismiss you." My parents were standing now. The facade of the grieving family had shattered, leaving only the desperate reality of two con artists whose long con had finally collapsed. Paul turned to me. His face was gray, his eyes wide with a frantic animal terror. "Kelsey," he hissed, his voice cracking. "Kelsey, please. We're your parents. You can't let her do this. You can't put us in jail." My mother reached across the aisle, her hand grasping at the air near my sleeve. "We made a mistake," she wept, the tears real this time, born of fear rather than performance. "We were young. We were overwhelmed. We came back, didn't we? We tried to reconnect. You can't destroy your own family over money." I stood up slowly. The bailiffs took a step forward, but I waved them off. I walked to the edge of the defense table, just out of their reach. I looked at them, really looked at them, for the first time in 25 years. I didn't see monsters. I didn't see giants. I saw two small, broken people who had spent their lives running from consequences. "You think I'm destroying you?" I asked, my voice calm, almost conversational. "You think I'm the one holding the sword?" I shook my head. This was the moment I had prepared for, the moment of absolute clarity. "I am not destroying you," I said. "I am simply the mirror. For 25 years, you have lived in a fantasy where you were the victims and I was the villain. You told yourselves that lie so many times you started to believe it. But a mirror doesn't lie. A mirror doesn't judge. It just reflects." I pointed to the screen, where their signatures still glowed in high definition. "That is your reflection. That is the choice you made. You sold me. You sold your father's legacy. And then you tried to sell a lie to a court of law. I didn't put you in this trap. You built it, brick by brick, lie by lie. I just turned on the lights." My father slumped back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. My mother just stared at me, her mouth open in a silent scream of realization. They weren't fighting me anymore. They were fighting the weight of their own history, and it was crushing them. Judge Vance cleared her throat. "The court finds the plaintiffs in direct criminal contempt," she ruled, her gavel coming down with a finality that echoed in my bones. "I am referring this matter to the district attorney for immediate prosecution on charges of perjury, fraud, and extortion. Officers, take them into custody." As the bailiffs moved in, handcuffing the parents who had once signed me away for a wire transfer, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even relief. It was the sudden, total absence of noise. The ticking clock had stopped. The game was over. I watched them go. I watched the parents who had once been the center of my terrifyingly large world be reduced to two figures in the back of a police cruiser. They didn't look at me. They were too busy looking at each other, already starting the cycle of blame, arguing over whose idea the lawsuit had been. For the first time, their noise didn't reach me. It was like watching a silent film in a theater I had already walked out of. I picked up the black tablet from the defense table. It felt lighter now, though I knew the weight of digital data hadn't changed. I walked out of the courtroom, my heels clicking on the marble floor with a steady, unhurried rhythm. Outside, Newport was wrapped in a thick, gray fog. Usually this weather made the city feel like a graveyard, damp and suffocating. But today, as I stepped onto the granite stairs of the courthouse, the air felt clean. It felt like a blank page. The gilded cage was gone. The mansion on the cliffs was just a pile of stone and glass. The legacy I had fought so hard to protect was finally safe. Not because I had hidden the cracks, but because I had exposed them. I sat on a bench overlooking the harbor. The water was choppy, steel gray against the white hulls of the wintered boats. I unlocked the tablet one last time. I navigated to the master directory, the folder containing the wire transfers, the emails, the surveillance logs, the scanned settlement agreement. 5 years of my life. 5 years of being the invisible architect, the silent guardian, the ghost in the machine. I didn't need it anymore. The truth was on the public record now. I pressed select all. Then I pressed delete. A small progress bar filled up and vanished. Just like that, the burden was gone. I wasn't the ghost CEO anymore. I was just Kelsey. And this is for you. If you are listening to this, and you are the one who holds the secrets. If you are the one who fixes the messes you didn't make. If you are the child who learned to be quiet because your silence was the only thing that kept the peace. I see you. I know what it's like to build a home inside your own head because the one you live in doesn't have room for you. I know the exhaustion of being the responsible one, the strong one, the wise one. They tell you these are compliments. They aren't. They are survival mechanisms. They are the heavy armor you had to forge because no one else was protecting you. But I want you to know something. You don't have to carry their legacy anymore. You don't have to audit their lies to prove you exist. Your worth is not a balance sheet. It is not found in how much pain you can endure or how many crises you can avert. You are allowed to put the ledger down. You are allowed to let them fail. You are allowed to walk out of the courtroom and into the fog. And for the first time in your life, just breathe. The truth doesn't break you. It frees you. If you've ever had to be the strong one in the silence, share this story. Let the truth be heard.